Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Links Golf Podcast. We got a fun one today. Brought in Tony Deere, a contributor for Links, to join Joe and I to talk about a lot of different topics. We're discussing the St. Andrews course update announcements. We're going to talk a little bit about Tony's Mount Rushmore series on the website. If you haven't seen those, go to our website, search Mount Rushmore, and you'll see several articles from him. Today, we're going to cover the Mount Rushmore of golf clubhouses, seaside courses, and mountain courses. And we've got some more material to chew on later with those. And then Tony is from the Pacific Northwest, so we talked to him a little bit about the great golf out there. He's very familiar with Gamble Sands, went recently, saw Scarecrow, so he talks about that. And then where else you should look to play when you're in the area. Another place you should look to play, of course, is Ireland, and Tourism Ireland sponsors the podcast this season. If you're looking for your next golfing adventure, I would point you in their direction and the direction of Ireland.com/golf to start planning your dream golf trip to the Emerald Isle. Whether it's playing Royal County Down, Ballybunion, any of the great links or the hidden gems in Ireland, you can go to Ireland.com/golf. They'll take care of you for a wonderful trip with great food, great drink, and of course, great golf. Please enjoy this conversation and look forward to hearing your thoughts on all we talk about today. Welcome, everyone, back to the Links Golf Podcast. I am digital editor Al Lunsford for Links, joined by Joe Passoff, my co-host, and today we're happy to be joined by a contributor to Links, longtime print and digital. You've probably read his stuff on our website or in our print publication. Tony Deere joins us from his corner of the woods on the West Coast. Tony, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Al. It's great to be back. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I mean, even since you and I talked, a lot of what we do is on email. So it's nice to actually talk in person and have something to talk about that's relevant and topical. And we'll kind of go across a number of different subjects on this podcast, but we want to begin today giving our brief thoughts on what's been in the news at the home of golf in St. Andrews. Tony brought this up as an idea to discuss in our Links Insider newsletter. We decided to have him on the podcast today to do a little roundtable with Joe and myself. But what most of you already heard at this point is that there will be some enhancement and restoration efforts at the old course at St. Andrews, which I'll read briefly. This is from October 28th, posted on the St. Andrews Links website. That work will begin. This was saying next week, and theoretically it's begun this week on enhancements and restoration of the old course ahead of the 155th Open in 2027. The project will refine the strategic challenge for elite players in a small number of areas for future championships while restoring traditional features that have evolved over time to improve the everyday playing experience for local and visiting golfers on the world-renowned links. Many more details within this article. You can find it on their website, standrews.com, but in essence, they're going to be adding a total of 132 yards to the old course in various spots, giving the championship tees a new total of 7,445 yards. There's also going to be a decrease in length at, the 12th hole, moving that tee box slightly to help spectator movement in that location of the course. That's in essence. Again, they'll go into a lot more detail in what you've read, and I know you guys have read all of this at this point. Initial thoughts, I can start anywhere with you guys. What say you to this announcement at the old course? Let's start with Tony, since he's our special guest today.
Um, like you say, it was the last week of October when the news came out. So we've had nearly a couple of weeks to think about it and mull it over. And really, I feel pretty much the same as I did 2 weeks ago. It's just I just roll my eyes, and I just shrug my shoulders because where does it end? Seriously, where does it end? I mean, I've got to be philosophical. I've got to be sensible and clever about this. Um, one doesn't want to rush in and say, "Oh, changes to the old course." Ooh, no, never. It's not like that. That as as Scott McPherson pointed out in his amazing books about the old course, it has been constant change. Um, thanks for whatever reason, the Gutty, the Haskell, whatever ball, the amount of play that there's been on the old course, the demand, the popularity, etc. It changes all the time, and it's in a state of flux. And we're just in our moment of time here now. So, when anything happens, we instantly, want to react, and we instantly want to do something, that suits us right now. Um, I'm as I get older, I'm sure it's an age thing, Al. I'm sure it's got to do with something to do with the fact that I'm getting older. But you just think, in 100 years' time, it's 98, yeah, and very nearly 100 years now that Presswick became obsolete. And something I've always been interested in. I've never read about it. I've never seen any quotes or read anything about it that I can remember. How did people feel when Prestwick was no longer an Open Championship venue? Um, Sunningdale, the old course at Sunningdale is another great example in outside London. That because that one I can remember. I used to go to the European Open in the 80s, um, to watch Seve and Woodsy and Faldo and Langer and Alathabal, Montgomery, whatnot. Um, and then it became obsolete. It just was too short for the big guys. And of course, that was as much to do with the members just not wanting to host a European Tour event anymore. But a lot of it was to do with the fact that Sunningdale Old had just become too obsolete. And yes, it still hosts seniors events. The Senior Open Championship, the Women's Open Championship, and they're absolutely fantastic, wonderful events. And we all get to see what an absolutely brilliant course Sunningdale Old is. But it just doesn't cater to it. It can't fit the the regular tour in these days. And I look back at that and I think, yes, that is disappointing. It's disappointing that the world doesn't get to see, although we do get, as I said, we get to see it with seniors and women's events, but we don't get to see the old course very often. Or sorry, the old course at Sunningdale very often, and it's a shame. Um, and as it relates to the old course at St Andrews, it's kind of death by a thousand cuts. We
Mhm.
the changes happen, and a few years later we've moved on with our lives. I remember when the changes were made in 2012. um there was quite a lot of uproar about that. Tom Doak certainly was upset, about what was happening to the back of the 11th green. um and now, you know uh 13 years on, it's no one barely remembers it.
Yeah.
The world just moves on and life just moves on, and we will move on from this as well, of course. But it just, as I say, going back to my initial reaction, you just roll your eyes again because are we not clever enough to come up with a solution whereby we keep one of the greatest golf courses in the world as a relevant course for championship golf,
Yeah.
because we're losing fast.
Hmm. Yeah, you're
and
right,
the
and it's not as if, the reaction is um, not something we have never seen before. It changes in advances of 2000 and 2005, the opens there, and 2015, like you mentioned. Um, but more so this idea that, like you said, where does that end? How much more can we do without it being sort of unrecognizable from what it was in certain ways? For me, a lot of this is like, you know, are we just overreacting because of the moment, and this is the moment in time that we do this, and everyone it gets all riled up and can get their thoughts out to the entire world publicly, and some just in search of more reaction, others genuine. But Joe, I wonder to throw it over to you now that we've gotten some discourse out, but is this that St. Andrews should never be touched, uh, or are we overreacting a little bit?
Al, Tony, I think if there's any one golf course on this earth that changes, that has evolved with time and changing conditions, players, equipment, and the rest, it is the old course. So I'm not opposed to change. And uh, I'm perfectly fine and understanding about change to the old course. Uh, and I hate change in general. I like everything to stay the same as much as possible because I'm old and curmudgeonly and I just want to see things stay the same. But with the old course, Tony touched on it. Um, Scott McPherson, an architect, wonderful architect in his own right, wrote an incredible book, maybe 2007, about the evolution of the old course. It's probably updated it since. And and I interviewed Scott for a 2015 Open Championship preview story, and it was amazing how uh, pragmatic and understanding he was about the changes. And I love what he said about 11, for instance, with gosh, it would be great. Oh, horrors, you're lowering that left side of the green. But with today's green speeds, it's useless. And this way, by lowering it, at least you can put the hole over there a few times and bring that bunker back into play. And then I happened to be able to ask Tiger Woods about it, and Tiger said that lowering the back left portion of the green wouldn't make any difference to him. Quote, you'd have to be stupid to fire at that pin because anything over the green and you've got nothing. Guys are still going to take middle of the green. That's why you see so many three putts there. So it can influence players of every caliber in different ways. And I think that the key aspect to all of this, okay, what changes are being made? And you outline them at the beginning. Why do the changes? Well, to keep the golf course relevant for especially elite players in this day and age. Who made the decisions to do that and who is executing the work? So these days with Mackenzie and Ebert, who are now the go-to for open venues, yeah, I've got a fair degree of confidence that the changes that have been discussed, that are going to be put in play, maybe taking that pair of bunkers and moving them to where they will challenge today's elite players more. Some of the other changes, adding a little bit of length here and there. Okay, every course that hosts major championships does that. And although Doak's sentiments were wonderful, he would love to see the golf course as it played in 1920, that CB McDonald and Old Tom and all the rest, that was their old course. If they want to stay on the Rhoda as something that's testing enough for great players, they've got to continually adjust.
Mm.
And for me, the old course is this. Don't take this as sacrilege. It's not a Sam Snead or Scott Hope quote. When the wind is blowing It's my favorite championship venue in all of golf. It is so relentlessly interesting with decisions that have to be made, things accounted for, strategies, ball flight, and the rest of it. And when the wind is not blowing and the course is, and the day is soft, it is not an interesting championship test for me.
It's yeah, the whole adapt or die thing. Like you talk about all those major championship venues that have made changes. That Augusta goes through changes every year. That's sort of a different conversation. But again, to your point, Tony, how much is left for there to do? We're going to run out of ways to differentiate this if we don't, end up putting a stop or finding a resolution somewhere else in the professional game. I don't think this is affecting 98% of the human population that goes and plays the old course, but to be able to have it as this championship test, like what more can be done? We're sort of looking at the next 20 years of this and assuming that there are other technological advancements that happen and continue to push the needle on how far the golf ball can go. Maybe that's reared back in a little bit, but maybe there are other ways to combat it.
Yeah, there's a few things that spring to mind, Al. Firstly, we've known that the tee at the 17th has been pushed back onto the Eden course for a few opens now, is it? I think. And the fifth, the tee at the fifth is going back onto the new course. So I had a very interesting discussion with a friend in Scotland about this a few days ago. What if indeed the championship is still held at St Andrews in 100 years' time? What will the course look like? Will at some point the decision be made that um fingers crossed this never happens because it's an absolutely fantastic golf course, but will the new course be somehow altered, changed, removed in order to allow more tee boxes for the old course? Um, if the championship does continue there, will the new course stay intact, but will tees forever be found on the new course that will lengthen the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, etc. Um, we don't know what the old course will look like or how it will play in a championship in 100 years' time, because the championship the first Open Championship that was played there in 1873, the course looked very, very different and played very, very different to how it did when Cam Smith won. It's it's just ever changing. And as Joe said, change is hard. When you get to our age, change is hard to take sometimes, and certainly in places where you've felt so comfortable and you felt so good about the world like a place like the old course at St Andrews, it's changing and it's difficult to take. And you do have to step back a little bit and think for a couple of weeks as we've had the opportunity to do, to realize it just happens. Um, the other thing that did come spring to mind is, to prevent all this, to stop this from happening, and to keep Augusta National relevant. Similarly, is there a time when, if the Open Championship goes to the old course or at the Masters, will a specific ball, a Masters ball or an Open Championship old course ball, be instated? Um, it sounds crazy. It sounds a foolish and totally over the top reaction, but if that's what it takes, we get used to the weird things that we do. In 10 years' time, we look back and we laugh or smile, but we just get used to it. It just becomes part of life. So who knows that, an Augusta ball and an old course at St Andrews Ball might happen. And sorry, another point that just came to mind is, the we know that a lot of people feel very strongly that the equipment has gotten out of hand, and it's just been a case of 30 or 40 years of the USGA and the R&A not doing it, because stemming from the mid 80s business with Ping and the square groove controversy there. The R&A and the USGA are very reluctant to get into legal matters. Fair enough, obviously. But at some point, do they? I don't know if Mark Darbin will, the new R&A CEO. Mike Wan is at the USGA. Is I think he's a brilliant man. I think he's done so much good stuff for the USGA. But is he going to have the gun? Not well, you know what I'm saying. The cojones to do something major like that. And the USGA and the R&A did let the equipment get away from them, and every year or every so often, it just goes back a little bit, and we have a totally new game, and the game changes. So I wonder if we can have life by 1,000 cuts. So we sort of go back, or not to where we were in the 80s or whatever. That's too long ago. But as the R&A and the USGA are doing now, we just have a little change backwards. Instead of having a little change forwards, we have a little change backwards. So in 10 years' time, 15, 20 years' time, we're at a point where distance of the tee isn't as paramount of a thing, a factor as it is now, because I think most people, if they thought really deeply about it, would come to the conclusion that distance is plays too big a part in the current game, and it to see Rory McIlroy or Justin Thomas or whoever hit a 350-yard drive, for 5 seconds, you think, wow, that's amazing. And then you see another one, and then another one, and you've seen it, and you see hundreds, thousands of these shots where every time the TV commentator goes, wow, that's amazing. It really isn't amazing anymore. We've seen it so often, and it's not killing the game. That's ridiculous. But it just changes the game. It changes the way the game is played, and who can compete and who can't. The fact is, so many more players can compete now, that probably weren't able to 20, 30 years ago, because the driver is such that you can hit the ball a few millimeters away from the sweet spot and still get a perfectly good result.
Right.
And Joe and I are from the era where if you hit a persimmon driver a few millimeters away from the sweet spot, your hands would hurt. The ball would end up somewhere embarrassing. You might break something, a window or whatever, car window, and it was. And I see videos from the 70s, 80s where professional players are hitting not ranked bad shots, but questionable shots, because hitting a driver used to be such a skill. And now with so many players, able to just stand up, tee the ball up, take a driver, and whack it as hard as they can, and as far as they can. I think that I just think that takes away a really important skill from the game, and and doesn't allow the really quality ball strikers, the great players, to distance themselves from lesser players.
Yeah.
That was a 15-minute answer for one question. I can't even remember what the question was.
Well,
Sorry.
none of these decisions are made lightly, and that kind of monumentous sort of decision. And if you were going to make a one ball for a given tournament or one ball for the professional game in general, even this decision to make changes to a few less than half of the holes at St. Andrews doesn't come lightly. And like Joe mentioned, the guys that are involved, McKenzie and Ebert, now have their hands on pretty much every Open Championship course. So they're trusted in their work. The R&A trusts them to do the right thing. And we'll see where it goes. I'm sure there will be another crossroads that they'll have to make a decision on in the future. See what the scores look like at the next Open there in a couple of years. But it's a different ballgame when the wind's blowing. So hey, they may decide like, oh, this was great, and this is going to work out perfect because the wind was blowing 35 miles an hour, or it's a perfectly calm tournament and they get close to touching 30 under par and the world is ending. So I guess a lot remains to be seen. Any further thoughts from you, Joe, before we go into Mount Rushmore stuff?
No, the last thing I'd say is for the 1 week every 5 to 7 years that the games best show up. And then obviously you have the Dunhill Cup and other significant championships. You do have to make it relevant and compelling for those folks. For the rest of the year and years, it's regular folks, for anywhere from scratch golfers to 18s and pluses and that kind of thing. I think if you just leave enough of it alone as we go through the years, so the Swilken burn in front of the first green, okay, we don't want to widen that and turn it into a lake, maybe pop a little waterfall over there. Okay, that's destroying what we know. But if you give some of the same memories that you have, even if it's not entirely 1 through 18, then future generations will still be able to enjoy a good deal of what our predecessors did. Don't forget, hitting over the O in the Old Course Hotel is a relatively new phenomenon of the last 40 years. And there were drying sheds before that, and other things. I mean, everything pretty much changes out there. Keep enough of it the same for the next 100 and 200 years, and I'll be fine with that.
No one wants to lose the Old Course as a venue for professional golf. Everyone wants to see that continue. So all of this comes from an impassioned place that, the worst case scenario is that the Old Course becomes Prestwick and we never get to see tournament play on it again. So let's all figure out how we can work together, minimize the risk involved with what's being done. And yeah, no waterfalls in the Swilken burn. That's for sure. But let's stay with St. Andrews. Tony has done a great job of producing a series of articles for us that we're calling the Mount Rushmores. And Tony, maybe I'll let you introduce this idea of what the Mount Rushmore of X is within this series. Not necessarily the four best things, but because the man who built Mount Rushmore wasn't saying these are the four best presidents ever. But can you give us an idea of what the theme is here for each of these pieces?
Certainly. As you say, with the his name was Gutson. I've forgotten his name. Gutson Borglum or something.
Gutson Borglum.
Borglum. I don't think I've ever read anywhere a quote from him saying why he chose those four. I mean, we all assume, or I assume, that they were his favorites. He thought they had the most impact on American politics, American life. and that's the I think that's the philosophy I took into the uh the Mount Rushmores of the various golf aspects. Um, I wanted to pick four that weren't my favorite, weren't people's favorites necessarily. They were just great, and they were the first places you thought of when if someone came to you and said, pick a Mount Rushmore of clubhouses, greens, golf rides, or whatever. Who are the for no reason, there's no criteria, just who are the first four people or the first four greens, clubhouses that you think of?
Yeah. And so we did this exercise with, he's done it with several things now. We're going to talk about a few of them today. The most recent one was one he mentioned just now, clubhouses. We'll start there and do a few. We're not going to get to all of them and may save some for another conversation, another episode down the road. And would love to hear what our listeners have to say in this matter. So let's start with clubhouses. We're right there at St. Andrews, and the Royal and Ancient is at the top of the list. I think that is a quality pick. What Tony, you've done a good job of in each of these is that they're all worthy, and you have a justification for them being on the list. You also list several honorable mentions that were probably in consideration in your head when doing this exercise, but of course, everyone's going to have their personal opinions in Mount Rushmore to put together. So, briefly go through your picks: the Royal and Ancient, the clubhouse at Augusta National, the clubhouse at Muirfield, Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, and Oakmont Country Club. I don't think you can argue against any of those. The first ones that came to mind that weren't immediately there were actually both for me on your honorable mentions list, and that to me was Winged Foot and Baltusrol. Just having experience in both of those clubhouses, I think Baltusrol has done an incredible job in restoring and upgrading their facilities. The way they've weaved in history in the locker room setting downstairs, just the stately presence of that clubhouse over those two golf courses, up to the guest rooms and the dining facilities. Absolutely love that golf course. So maybe on a personal, if I was going to replace one on here, I may replace Oakmont with Baltusrol. But Joe, any that would have made your list that weren't in his four?
Yeah, I like the way, Tony, that you put it about what are not necessarily your favorites, but what are the first four in your mind that come to mind as the greatest that should qualify for the Mount Rushmore of clubhouses. And I thought about it because I've done my own research and stories and a lot of personal travel on clubhouses. And you think, where do we rank them in terms of ambiance / aura? Meaning, doesn't have to be big, palatial, fancy, have all the new gadgets. Does it just feel perfectly? Facilities. Okay. If you'd rather have, does it have this, and this, as making up a great clubhouse? History, obviously, and then architecture brilliance. A club may be more on the low key side, never hosted a big tournament, but have an absolutely stunning building. And in your honorable mentions, you pointed out a number of examples that are just, striking, unique examples of building architecture. And then, of course, you talk about exteriors versus interiors. The biggest thing I noticed in all the comments that Links readers weighed in on, and they were voluminous. So Tony struck a great chord with folks out there, is for all the suggestions that come in, what do you replace? What's the one or two or three that you have to take off in order to pop another one on? Probably most vulnerable here is Oakmont, even though Oakmont is stellar with everything that is stood for since 1903 and all the U.S. Opens and other championships that have come there. Um, Al, you mentioned Baltusrol, which I'm a huge fan of, and they've done some phenomenal work at their clubhouse, including all the history that goes in. Another club that comes to mind just like that is Atlanta Athletic Club, which very handsome exterior, even though it was only built in the 1960s, 70s, um, but a Bobby Jones museum within the clubhouse because he was an Atlanta Athletic Club member. Uh, four others I'll mention very quickly. First up, a personal favorite, Shinnecock Hills. Basically just as historic, or even more historic than Oakmont. Um, it was supposedly the first building ever constructed in 1892 for the express purpose to function as a golf clubhouse. Now, they don't quite have Oakmont's tournament history, but they've got a pretty good history all the same. And the great Stanford White, one of America's foremost architects in the era. Uh, I love what Baltusrol has done with their exhibits inside. From an exterior and from an overall perspective, I just don't think clubhouses get any golfier than Wingfoot. Between the placement of the locker rooms, where the grill room is located, the patio out back, the stone exterior, the access to both courses, uh, absolute personal favorite that I could see sliding in Oakmont's spot, although I'm a huge Oakmont fan. Finally, two off the beaten path choices. And Tony, I'll run this first one by you, get your no, second one by you, I'll get your reaction. First one to me is Indian Creek, an old William Flynn design in the Miami area of Florida. Absolutely unique as a Spanish hacienda style clubhouse, Mediterranean, with unbelievable interior locker rooms, patio, looking out over Key Biscayne and the city. And then here we go. In London, Stoke Park, formerly known as Stoke Poges, uh, a great old Colt course that was not necessarily one of Harry Colt's best courses, and been a lot of money poured into the club in the last 20 years. Famously featured the clubhouse in the movie Goldfinger, a James Bond epic from the 1960s. And I just thought that was as opulent a setup and setting as I could have imagined for a golf clubhouse. Tony, what say you?
Um, if someone wanted to say Stoke Park, Stoke Poges was in the Mount Rushmore of clubhouses, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't have anything to say to them. I mean, it's fine, no problem at all. Go ahead. That's fine with me. One of the exact the same with Bolts. I've never been in the clubhouse at Boltswell, so I don't know, but I've heard some amazing about Boltswell. But I just didn't think I was in a position to put it on a Mount Rushmore. One of the honourable mentions that I thought was going to be the most controversial was Nairn in Scotland, because if you just stand outside Nairn Clubhouse, I mean, it's a fine building, it's very nice, but it really doesn't. You really wouldn't start thinking, oh, that's a Mount Rushmore of clubhouses. It's a very nice building, but it's not the R&A, it's not Muirfield, but the history room inside Nairn makes it so special. Um, and what I thought about Nairn was, in addition to the history room, with the four that I did choose, the R&A, Muirfield, Augusta National may be different. Oakmont, these aren't the places that I would necessarily want to spend an afternoon or a few hours after my round. I want to visit them once, twice, three times, whatever, and they were the four clubhouses that first came to mind, but they're not necessarily the clubhouses I want to spend most time in. There's a course just 5 miles from here at North Belling, which has a wonderful clubhouse. Get a fantastic sandwich and a lovely local beer, and I'm as happy as Larry in that. But you wouldn't put it in the on a Mount Rushmore of clubhouses. So the criteria were it was difficult. Is it one that you desperately want to spend time in? I've spoken with RNA members for 20, 30 years about the RNA Clubhouse. It's a museum. It's one of the it's the probably the most important building in the game. Um, and it deserves respect and reverence for that. But does that necessarily make it the place that you want to spend a lot of time in? Um, or I think everyone that you speak to, every RNA member that you ever speak to will say yes, yes, of course, that they know what they have, that they know there's a reverence for the building, but that's not to say that every second of every day at the RNA clubhouse you have to be on your absolute best behavior and in your Sunday best. I mean, there are times when even RNA members can let their hair down a little bit. So it's with all the Mount Rushmore pieces, Al. It was difficult. I really had to think long and hard before starting them all about what my criteria for these is going to be, because I know that there's going to be a lot of controversy. Some people are not going to agree with the my decisions at all, and who knows? The day after I've written it, I might feel different myself. Um,
Yeah.
but,
It's
you just have to have a criteria, and you then have to pick the four that you think best fit that criteria.
it'd be much
I,
easier too if if the guy who did Mount Rushmore came out and said, "This was my criteria. This is the reason why I picked these because of X. Like they're the most historically significant, made the biggest contribution to society, what have you." And for those wondering, if you didn't know off the top of your head, it was George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln are your four picks for the real Mount Rushmore. So, um, let that mean whatever you want it to mean in terms of a golf Mount Rushmore. But again, I can imagine, Tony, you're like, okay, what am I picking? Why am I picking it? And is that going to be good enough for people to deal with? So let's move to the next thing. I want to go from there to let's go to seaside courses, Mount Rushmore. I think this was one of um, the first that you did, maybe one of the first couple that you went through the exercise, and in theme with what we just talked about, the old course is also part of this list. So this list goes the old course at St. Andrews, Pebble Beach Golf Links, Cypress Point Club, Royal County Down Golf Club. Maybe the most indisputable four of any that we did this exercise with. And it's hard to supplant any of those for any reason. And I almost felt like when the first time I read this one, Tony, it was like, I mean, he got it exactly right. And, you know, what's the point of even talking about honorable mentions? Like, this is the list. Um, did you feel that way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, spot on. Yeah, every Mount Rushmore piece. I think I've made the point in maybe in the clubhouse one. The first two choices are usually universally accepted, but there's some dissension or there's some controversy or disagreement, about the last one or two. I felt with these four, no one's going to have. This one is actually going to create the least discussion because everyone's going to read it and think, yeah, fair enough. That's exactly what it is, should be. Yeah, obviously there are, the thing with the problem that I have with rankings, Al. I don't have a problem with rankings. I think they're great. But the problem with rankings is that as soon as you have your top four or your top 100 or your top 10 or whatever, people instantly think, well, you fool, you idiot. Well, how can you not have this course or this clubhouse or this person? Well, that might be, if you've got a Mount Rushmore, that might be your fifth choice.
Yeah.
And top five in 38 or 39,000 clubhouses is not bad. So or the 101st, the 101 best course in America out of 16,000 is pretty good. It's pretty good. So
I think Joe knows a lot about that.
yeah, it really it makes me wince when when these rankings come out and somebody immediately says oh that how can that list be relevant, how can that list be even serious because you haven't put this course in. Well, that might be the very next course that you were thinking of. It might just be one outside the other 10 or the other 50 or the other 100, which are brilliant too. But it's all discussion for the game and it's all great stuff. But with going back to your point about the seaside courses, that of course there were a few that deserve mention. Muirfield, all the courses are abandoned. But I think those for quality, for history, I think they were the four. I don't think anyone can have a problem really.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe, thoughts? Anything that wasn't maybe even on the honorable mentions that you would have thrown in there?
Yeah, Tony mentioned in his very first line of his piece, Mount Rushmore of seaside golf courses, that this quartet probably caused the least amount of disagreement in his own mind, and probably, as we've said, among the folks who read it. The instant I read that and looked at Tony's choices, I fell in line. Yeah, yeah, I can't argue with that. Then I thought a little further as we prepared for this podcast. It's funny how Pebble Beach races to our minds so quickly and deserves its place on the Mount Rushmore of seaside courses. Yet it's been knocked down a few pegs in everybody's rankings over the last 10 years or so. Whether it finishes 8th in the country or 10th in the world or 12th or 15th, something like that, it doesn't carry quite the magic that it did a generation ago. So then you say, well, should National Golf Links or Shinnecock replace Pebble there? But you just don't think of National and Shinnecock and, quote, seaside in the way you do Pebble Beach. Partly because there's so much respect for the design, hole after hole after hole after hole, at National and Shinny. And at Pebble, it's a little bit like, yeah, there's a couple of inland holes that don't really wow us, but then there's everything else that blows us away. And that's why Pebble rises to where it does. The only other criteria I could have thought of, guys, is instead of just merely being next to the sea or above the sea, which are the courses that have the best, most exciting, dramatic encounters with the sea? And the first course I thought of was Teeth of the Dog at Casa de Campo. And again, with 7 holes, as writer Brian McCallan once put it, that they're not on the sea, they're in the sea. That are right down next to it, put your toe in the water right there, kind of thing. Couple of other new ones that I haven't seen, and I'm curious about whether they could rise up and break into this quartet. Tara Eady, of course, in New Zealand. Point Hardy in the Caribbean, the Coeur Crenshaw course. I'm a little bit partial to Ballybunion. Couple holes in particular, although I think it still falls just short of the quartet that we've identified. And then I have not been in person to see the changes at Trump Turnberry's Ailsa, where holes were moved closer to the sea. And maybe the world will get a chance one day to see it if the Open Championship returns. Cape Wickham is another example that's been ranked very high of, just absolute wow drama kind of thing. So for me, probably Tara Eady and Point Hardy rise closest to the highest of breaking through. Problem is, what do either one of those actually replace? Casa de Campo in a level of itself, as far as just actual sea encounters. But that's not what Tony wrote. It was the Mount Rushmore of seaside golf courses. And I think the 4 choices that he made are perfect.
See, I thought maybe one of the ones that we didn't see on there that Joe, you might have mentioned would, given your history and headlines around it, would be Old Head. Not that old, but certainly spectacular and dramatic on that peninsula in Kinsale, high up on top of cliffs. Thought that may have crossed your mind.
Maybe the best views on any golf course in the world. And I think Old Head has just been held back a little bit by the recency bias. And I point out Tara Eady, Point Hardy, and of course, Jerry Pate doing some work on Casa de Campo. And I think they've just reopened or just about to, Al. So a little bit more in the news.
In the coming weeks. Mm-hmm.
And then Old Head just, hasn't had that national, international kind of tournament that would give it the broader appeal. But holy cow. That could be the strongest choice for number 5.
All right, great points. Everything good there. Let's move on to mountain golf courses, Mount Rushmore. So we're going from seaside up the mountain. Tony, I liked how you began this one in saying, how do you define what a mountain golf course is? Does it have to be in the mountains? If you can see a mountain from the golf course, does that make it a mountain course? This is a little bit trickier to actually determine what we're discussing here. But the 4 you went with were Cascades at the Omni Homestead Resort and Spa. You had Castle Pines in Colorado, Jasper Park Lodge in Jasper, Alberta, Canada, and another Canadian one, the Fairmont Banff Springs Golf Course. All magnificent in their own right. Again, a number of honorable mentions from around the world. But this one I struggled with trying to think of anything. Someone in the comments, maybe the first one that I thought of, not that I would have just dropped in the honorable mentions as well, was Wade Hampton. I think my Carolina mind went there first, and that being one of Tom Fazio's great designs. But again, this one must have been sort of the opposite of what the seaside was, in that it was so clear the decisions that were seaside. This one was a little cloudy, if you will.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the seaside courses one. I mean, you research them all, obviously, but that one required the least research and the least knocking my head and trying to think of alternatives and trying to talk myself out of certain courses and trying to talk myself back into certain courses. with the seaside courses, I was pretty set immediately, and I came up with those four, within 15, 20 seconds, and I never changed my mind. With the mountain courses, I've really had to think long and hard about what to include and why. And I think a lot of the I say problem, it's not wasn't a problem. A lot of why that is because um, I mountain courses have never been my favorite. Um, that's not to say there aren't great mountain courses, obviously, but mountain golf has never appealed to me as much as seaside golf or heathland golf or golf on the plain, in Nebraska or Colorado. Or it's just never appealed to me because well, it has appealed to me, but but the worst mountain courses I think are the worst courses I've played. So if you can imagine, like the well of golf courses, so you've got the greatest of the greatest of the best here and the worst of the worst down here. The worst of the worst is kind of littered and populated with mountain courses, where I think in an effort to bring the scenery to life, and to make it more dramatic, the quality of the golf has been completely forgotten. And I could name off the top of my head, 10 mountain courses where I'm glad I went to them. I'm glad I played them once because they're striking, they're stunning, they're beautiful. A lot of them in Colorado, where I used to live 20 years ago. Um, but I would never return to them. I would never go back to them. I never want to play them again because I think they're bad golf courses. I think they're not terribly enjoyable from a golfing standpoint. To look at, they're amazing. And I could show pictures of them to my wife or friends who don't play golf, and there we go. Wow, that's amazing. Of course you want to play there. Well, yes, once, but then the types of shot you play and that sort of thing just didn't appeal to me. There are too many courses I played in Colorado 20 years ago that start up here, go down here, and end up here. And oops, sorry, that U shape, V shape design it got so old and so unenjoyable. Um, I remember standing on a tee at a course, but I won't name it, and just think, and this was quite early on. This is probably the fifth or sixth hole, and thinking, oh, not again. It's so it's just not very clever. I just think that the a lot of the mountain courses, that they're lowest hanging fruit. Just go for the views and forget the golf. And because of that, I never especially enjoyed mountain golf. So that one did take a lot of research.
I think you ended up with four pretty good ones. All that being said, Joe, any thoughts here to the list and something else that would have come to mind?
Yeah, I think although I've never played Wade Hampton, the consensus for a long time, even among folks who are not huge Tom Fazio fans, is that this could be his best work. This could well be the best mountain course ever built. The way it uses the terrain and the shot challenges and the scenery. So I probably would put Wade Hampton in there actually pretty easily, even though I've never seen it. Castle Pines, a long time PGA Tour stop, a generation or so ago. I remember when it first got into Golf Digest Top 100 in 1987, and obviously, if it qualified for the top 100, there were a lot of positive comments about it. And one of their national voting panelists at the time was Tom Watson, who the magazine pointed out cast a dissenting vote, who said simply, I don't like carry stop golf. So, I had to think. In fact, I had to think for a few years about carry stop and like, oh, yeah, okay. He's talking about just flying it from point A to point B versus letting the ball run along the ground and having those kinds of things happening. But it still continues to be in top 100 lists all these years later, even though it doesn't host a tournament on a regular basis. They have had the PGA Tour playoffs, the BMW Championship there. Jasper and Banff, both Fairmont properties, two of my absolute favorite places. I love them both. Somehow, in half the rankings, Jasper comes out ahead. The other half, the Banff comes out ahead. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think the question you guys touched on earlier is just what constitutes a mountain course. I'm thinking, Tony, you've had such issues with so many mountain courses because true mountain courses built on the side of a mountain or within and over mountains just didn't have the budget to move enough rock and enough dirt to give a better playing experience. So you do wind up with a lot of goofy shots, a lot of blind shots, a lot of repetition. We got to stick a green somewhere and down we go to the valley and then back up. And some of the side hill stuff is, okay, that gets old after 2 holes. So what else is out there? Obviously, a lot of positive talk this past 12 months about Macklemore, especially the new course with Bill Bergen and Reese Jones called The Keep. In my home state, interestingly, Forest Highlands up in Flagstaff, a couple hours north of Phoenix, Scottsdale, a marvelous Weiskopf Moorish design from the late 80s. Really, really fun members golf. Just again, 7,000 foot elevation, but lots and lots of great variety. Broadmoor East comes to mind. I think probably a stronger test overall. Some others out there in Colorado, and then one not too far away from the homestead, at least it's in Virginia, is called Primland. And that was Donald Steele with Tom McKenzie and really, really wonderful golf course that's not nosebleed elevation. And that is how you kind of, what do we want in our mountain golf experience? As we talked about earlier, pretty mountains in the backdrop that your wife and friends would go, ooh, that looks nice. Or mountains that actually come into play as part of the strategy and part of the character of the golf course. Yeah, I don't know if there's a right answer, but those are different alternatives. We have mountain courses in Phoenix and Tucson, but they're in the desert. Very different deal than that alpine style mountain course that you see, most other places. So if I had to make one pick, it would be somehow to get Wade Hampton in there. And that's the call from here.
I think another one to maybe look out for, Cabot Pacific, the course they're building at Revelstoke in British Columbia as a newcomer. Expected now, it's been pushed back a little bit. 2027, I think, is when they're expecting that to open up. But I visited that when they first announced it and sort of toured the site there, and it sits on this bench right above the Columbia River. So a really a fascinating place for a golf course. We'll see how it turns out. Whitman, Axland, and Cutton behind the design there. And maybe that is a perfect transition, I think.
Actually, can I just make another point about?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Joe hit on it absolutely. With the criteria for what is a mountain course, whether you play over the mountains or you can see mountains, what actually makes a mountain course? With Banff and Jasper, I mean Banff you could almost classify it as a forest course because it's deep in the forest. But you get to the fourth hole, and the Alberta Rockies are right there, and it's the most amazing scene I think I've ever had on a golf course. Um, but what necessarily makes it a mountain course? It's in the mountains, or it plays over them or around them. Um, so I think Banff and Jasper. I think Stanley Thompson did a brilliant job of not letting you know that you're in the mountains, but without forcing you to hit any crazy shots, any crazy uphill or downhill shots. Um, and a downhill tee shot looks amazing. When you stand on the tee for the first time, it looks amazing, and it's very picturesque. But is it necessarily the best challenge of golf or the best golf shot? I'm not so sure. And an uphill second shot isn't, or very rarely is something that we enjoy or that we remember. So the criteria for actually deciding what a mountain course was the thing that I really had to think about for that one. And I think if you had told me that Banff and Jasper weren't mountain courses, I probably wouldn't have complained too much. I would have said, well, I think they are actually, but they don't play over mountains or around mountains. The mountains that you see, the mountains that they're around you, um, and they're absolutely wonderful places to be. Banff especially.
Well, hey, that still works for my transition because I'm going to talk to you about a place where you can see the mountains, the Cascades Mountains, um, and the Columbia River below, and that's Gamble Sands. Tony, I know you had the opportunity to visit there recently, and I'm transitioning away from the Mount Rushmore for anyone who is listening for that. Um, we missed uh, golf architects, greens, and golf writers. So we may get to those in a future episode. Spoiler alert that neither of the three of us are on that golf writers Mount Rushmore list, but Tony picked some good options there. But anyways, Tony, I wanted to talk to you about Gamble Sands a little bit and then just about this sort of where else to go and see in your neck of the woods and in your part of this country. People are familiar with Gamble Sands by now, obviously very familiar with Bandon Dunes, Chambers Bay, but if you could give us maybe one or two places that uh, aren't on anyone's radar or on very few at least to consider. But start with Gamble Sands. What did you see there? The new um, golf course that opened up there recently to give that place now two big courses and a short course.
Um, whenever anyone goes to Bandon, the conversations you have in the clubhouses and the restaurants, that evening are absolutely wonderful. Which is the best course here? Which is your favorite course at Bandon Dunes? Exactly the same thing is going to happen at Gamble Sands. The two courses there now are absolutely superb, and having a discussion about which is your favorite and which is better and why you think so is going to fill up a lot of dinner time conversation there. I'm very biased about Gamble Sands, and it's I've probably said this 100 times, so forgive me for saying it, but that was actually my name. I actually thought of that name, and David and the owners liked it, so they went with it. I think it was. I think it was. I'm 99% sure it was the last place I broke 80. And it's. I mean, you stand on some of those tees and those fairways, and it is the most. It's the most beautiful place. It really is unbelievable with the Cascade Mountains to your north, and and west, and also the Columbia River down below you. Some of the views are absolutely exceptional. And I mean, with that in mind, I mean, could you almost class Gamble Sands as a mountain course because the Cascades are right there?
Sort of
But
what I was
I mean,
getting at. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't put me in mind of a mountain course at all. Um, but the Cascades are very visible. Um, the difference between the two courses that there isn't a if you wanted to get into the weeds and into the particulars, of course there are differences between the two courses, but they're similar. I mean, if you play Scarecrow and if you play Gamble Sands, you know you're in the same place. You know you're in on the high desert in central Washington. The golf is I mean when you say player friendly and you've got to I mean you hear a lot of people play Gamble Sands and say they had their best course ever. Well, that's great, that, but you have to identify the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean to say it's easy or it's too easy. If you put the tees back and if you put some flags in some strange positions and you really um, take dehydrate the greens and make them hard and fast. Now, Gamble Sands can play plenty hard, um, but Scarecrow is very much like Gamble Sands in that it's wide fairways, big greens. You'll hit a lot of fairways, you'll hit a lot of greens, but will you necessarily come away with a great score? Maybe not. I mean, there are just as many exciting, wonderful holes to play as there are on the original course. There are some fantastic views of the river. Um, the green complexes are just so fascinating with all the bunkering and the mounds, natural mounds, and the contours on the greens. From every tee, there's a decision to be made on your best line. That's the beauty of modern day courses, I think, and Gamble Sands in particular is you don't just stand on the tee and you know exactly where you have to go. The decision is taken away from you because it's clear where you have to go and only one place is going to work. Only one type of shot is going to work. That's absolutely not the case at Gamble Sands. You stand on that tee and you might have five or six options on where best to go, and any one of them could work. You can make any one of them work, but you just have to spend time thinking about what route am I going to take to the hole here, and that just makes golf so much more interesting and enjoyable. And I think you'll come off both courses at Gamble Sands, and if you haven't played them already, and you'll realize how great and how enjoyable golf can truly be. Because a lot of courses, with when we get too many trees or we get too much rough or small targets, it's nice to be able to if you execute well and you hit good shots, of course you're going to enjoy it. It's golf. You hit a good made a good score, but you haven't necessarily had to think about how how best to get your hole in the ball and the quickest route for you to get your ball in the hole. And that's the game at Gamble Sands. You have to make wise decisions on how to get your ball in the hole in as few shots as possible, and that just makes it so great.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, it's high on my list to get to because uh, everyone sort of echoes the same kind of sentiment that you're talking about. And we've done plenty on the new course Scarecrow. We've got a great video on Scarecrow previewing that. Um, and disclaimer, if anyone didn't know, Tony and David McClay Kid are good pals. I think Tony, you've ridden on the plane with David, who's a licensed pilot, a few times to get to Gamble Sands. So hence the when Tony talks about having the idea for the name at Gamble Sands. I think quite literally, you told David on your way somewhere. So, for anyone who didn't know that your connection to him like that.
But how that came about is I don't know how many, probably getting on for 10 years ago, he was building a course in Nicaragua called Guaucalito de la Isla. Um, it's about 2 hours um, southwest of Managua. Um, and I and maybe four other writers, golf writers, have been invited by David to see this course. And actually, we were flown there by the owner, a gentleman called Don Carlos Pelas, um, and he had sent his private jet to Orlando, where the PGA show, merchandise show, was going on, and he picked us up in Orlando in his private jet, which wasn't, a two over here and two over here, and sit back and with seatbelt, and you can look outside the window this side and the aisles here. It wasn't like that. It was like a lounge. It was a beautiful lounge with food and drinks, whatever you wanted. Um, so a proper private jet in the most luxurious sense possible. Um, and he flew us down to Managua, and then we drove to the golf course, and we had a couple of days at the golf course, and then on the way back, um, because of timings and schedules and whatnot, that I think he was using his plane for something else. Would you believe? We couldn't actually take his private jet back to the States, so we had to fly commercial. And so we had a 2 hour drive back to Managua airport. And on the way, David was talking about a course that he was building in the Cascades somewhere in central Washington, but they didn't have a name for it. Um, so he said, "Look, if any of you have any ideas, just let me know." And as luck would have it, the following day, I had some time. I remember very well. I had a day off, and so I thought about it, and I thought about naming conventions, in America, naming golf courses, and you sort of have something to do with the topography or the geology, or uh, in a two-word title, you have something to do with the history of the place and something to do with the geology and the terrain. So Gamble was a Dan Gamble was a guy who he walked from Nova Scotia to Washington, walked in I don't know when it was in the gold rush. He came for the gold rush in central Washington. I don't know how long. I've never read how long it took him to walk. I'm guessing it wasn't overnight. Um, but he arrived in central Washington, Brewster, um, and he had various businesses. He made the first ferry across the Columbia River, and he became an orchardier. Um, and then I believe it was he married into the Gebbers family, who were orchardiers and fruit growers, and it just escalated from there. So I thought Gamble's kind of where it started. So I thought Gamble was a great name, and the course is on a very deep and narrow but very deep seam of sand. So I just thought Gamble Sands sounded, when I had a list of 20 historical features down this side and a list of 20 top topographical terrain like features down the other side, and I kind of mixed them all, and Gamble Sands was one of the combinations, and I thought that sounded pretty good. So I sent that to David, and he said yeah, and 2 minutes later he emailed back and said yeah, that's what it's going to be called.
Wow. All of us would hope to aspire to be the ones to name a golf course or golf property one day. That's really cool. Um, and I love the storyboard concept of that. It's also a nice play on words. Gamble's sort of a golfy term, the risk reward element of it all. So, yeah, definitely works. But before you go, let's do this last thing. If you had to pick one or two places that not many people know of in the Pacific Northwest that are worth a game in your opinion. I know there are plenty of articles that Tony has written that sort of cover this, best public golf in Washington. Uh, we did a series on American Dream courses, so those like affordable, public, off the beaten path type of places. But people can do their own research there. But given a nailing it down to one or two, what would you throw out there for us?
Um, the first course I would mention is a course called Wine Valley. Um, the only thing working against Wine Valley is really is quite remote, and there's not a great deal of other golf around it. Um, but it is great wine country. So if you love your wine, um, Wine Valley is a Dan Hickson design, and it's a superb golf course. It's in the far southeast corner of Washington in the Palouse. Um, and as I say, it is pretty remote, but you combine it with a wine trip. It's not too far. It's only an hour and a half, maybe to Spokane, which has got Spokane doesn't really have um, great courses that you'll be able to name off the top of your head, but it has got four absolutely wonderful municipal courses, of which the best is Indian Canyon, which was designed by Chandler Egan in 1930, I believe. And just a few miles the other side of the Washington Idaho state line is Coeur d'Alene and Circling Raven, and there's a number of great courses in the Coeur d'Alene region area. Circling Raven is a Gene Bates design from. I, I was there last year for the 20-year anniversary, so it's 20 years old now. It's a really really good golf course. So if you don't,
And if you're wondering about the Circling Raven logo, there it is on my shirt.
well, there you go.
What are the
There you
odds
go.
of that? Wow.
So if you don't mind a bit of driving, and of course, the scenery in Central Washington and Eastern Washington is pretty special. So it's really good driving. A trip to, you fly into Seattle, you might play Chambers Bay and you might play Salish Cliffs and one or two other courses in Seattle. But if you can then drive out um, to Suncadia, which has got a resort with a couple of nice courses, and then to Gamble Sands, and then you've got some more time, and you can drive to Wine Valley, you can drive to Spokane and Circling Raven. It's a really really wonderful trip, and you can fly in and out of Spokane if you want. So you can fly to Seattle and fly out of Spokane. And David David actually has a couple more courses coming in Washington. Well, actually, probably a couple of years, maybe even 3 years ago, there was talk of a place called Westport on the west coast. It's 2.5 hours southwest of Seattle, so about an hour and a half southwest of Chambers Bay. Um, Westport was a very prolific lumbering timber town and fishing town in the 70s, I think, going back to 70s and 80s. But it kind of it lost a lot of its financial assets, if you like.
Hmm.
And it's kind of I don't know the place very well, so I'm very loath to describe it. But I believe I don't think it's fallen on hard times or anything like that. But it certainly isn't the boom town that it was a long time ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But it has a state park, which is frankly in a bit of a mess. It's as state parks go, it's not the first you'd want to go to. It's a bit overrun and not in great condition. Um, and the town has or developers there. Actually, the developer is in Seattle, but they hired David to go and see the site there, and what once he clears the state park, once he clears it of all the overgrown trees, it's an absolutely it's pure links. It's sandy, kind of flat, more St Andrews than County Down or Port Rush. It's sort of East Coast links, East Coast Scotland links. It's an absolutely wonderful site, um, and it will do untold benefits for the town itself. It's been in the courts and in the legal process for a year or so. I believe there's a couple of environmental groups that have made barriers, but I think even they, if at the end of the day, if you really had to think long and hard about it, I mean, forget the golf. I mean, just the effect the impact it will have on the town, the jobs it will bring, the attention it will bring to the town and to the region. I think so. Long story short, fingers crossed for Westport, because I think it'll be a fantastic golf course. Because I've seen the layout and David's routing plan. It looks amazing. And so that's been going on for 2 or 3 years. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month, um, it came to light that he'd gone to a site in Pasco, which is in the Tri-Cities in South Washington. Um, and I read that he'd signed on for a course there, assuming that this was going to get underway sometime next year, maybe be ready in 2 or 3 years' time. He actually told me yesterday that they've begun construction already. They begun construction early this week, and because the growing season there, the playing season, the growing period is very slightly different to other areas around Washington. It will actually be playable quicker than expected. They're going to grass it next summer, and it probably won't be playable for the public until 2027. And I say the public, they're not exactly sure what the business model is going to be yet. I don't think it's going to be a direct competitor to Gamble Sands, but I mean, I don't think competitor is the word, because I think the two of them, with Wine Valley, Suncadia, I think the synergy between them will be amazing. And the trip to Central Washington to play golf will become one of the most popular in the country, because the quality of golf is so good. Um, and the last point on Pasco is, I believe the developers first contacted David in October 2024, and he was so busy with Laura Loma and Stream Song and just finishing up at Scarecrow, and it wasn't that long after Grable in Nebraska.
Right.
He said, "I'm too busy. I can't make it." The only possible reason why I would come out there is if it's a unicorn. And the developer said, "Sorry, what's a unicorn golf, in a golfing sense, in a building a golf course sense? What's a unicorn?" And David knew that he could describe it, and the developers wouldn't have a clue what he was talking about. So he said, "Well, a unicorn. You just know it when you see it. And the developers kept on trying to persuade him to come and see it, and he went in March, I believe it was, and he was there for a few minutes, and within a minute or two, he said, "Yep, this is a unicorn," because it's sandy ground, and it's on the Snake River. It overlooks the Snake River. It's on bluffs above the Snake River, which is, I think, about 10-15 miles east of Pasco. Um, and the photographs of the place, it just looks absolutely unbelievable. So again, sorry for the long-winded answer, Albert. You can't play it yet, but just have that on the radar.
Yeah,
That's very exciting.
very exciting indeed. I think we all appreciate that scoop. And appreciate you having you on with us today, Tony. I hope we can do
Thank
it
you.
again soon. Get to the rest of your Mount Rushmores, and talk at length at those as well. But um, yeah, thank you for making the time, uh, for Joe and myself. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much. And I know, sorry, some of my answers, stuff just comes to me, and my answers just go off on tangents. I hope you can edit it so that you actually get some good points in there.
We'll make it work. It'll be easy. Don't worry about that. All right, Joe.
Al, Tony, good to be with you today.
Likewise, Joe.
All right, thanks, guys.